For most of the medieval era, music was primarily reserved for the church and for some lucky members of the elite class. Advancements and societal changes in the Renaissance era allowed music to flourish in both of these venues while also branching out into more secular roles within the educated society. Despite all the hullabaloo with the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, there was continuous musical growth happening in both the Catholic and the Protestant churches. While the churches were busy fighting, greater use of music for secular purposes was being developed for the rest of the educated society. Sacred music was primarily in the form of the motet, or the Mass, while secular music included madrigals and the rise of both instrumental music and dance music. One of the significant genres of sacred Renaissance music was the motet. A motet can be defined as an unaccompanied choral composition based on a sacred Latin text. In general, motets used religious text not used in the Mass, since by this time, the Mass already had standardized music. Motets were often polyphonic, meaning there were various vocal parts sung at the same time. Though motets started being written in the late medieval era, they developed greatly in and are most associated with the Renaissance era. One main characteristic of the Renaissance motet was the use of imitative polyphony, which is successive voice parts that echo each other, kind of like a round. We can see and hear this in the text and in the successive adding of vocal parts. The motet was typically in Latin text and was for the ordinary Mass. One important composer of motets during the Renaissance era was Josquin des Prez. One of his most famous motets, Ave Maria, can be heard here. While the Mass had already been set to music in the medieval era, composers continued writing new iterations, many of which included elaborate polyphonic sections. To the Catholic Church, this was a problem because it seemed that more focus was being given to musical consideration than to the actual words of the Mass. Thankfully, Italy had a composer of their own named Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina. Palestrina's style was conservative and balanced, as he gave careful consideration to both the beauty of the music and the comprehensibility of the words. Palestrina's style also showed importance of simple melodies that are easily sung and gave focus to the words rather than complicated harmonies. The purity of his Pope Marcellus Mass was a perfect fit for the needs of the Catholic Church at a time when they supposedly had been considering dismissal of polyphonic music from the service. The Mass remains his most well-known composition. Outside of the church, entertainment was booming. Madrigals, which are secular multi-voice songs sung without accompaniment, were a popular form of musical entertainment, especially in Italy and England. Madrigals were based on love-related poetry. They were often sung by the educated public at social gatherings. Madrigals were emotionally expressive and used a musical technique called word painting, in which the music reflects the action of the text. For example, if the text says running down, the notes will sound descending. One famous Italian madrigal composer was Carlo Jasualdo. He is well known for emotional madrigals, such as his Moro lasso al mio duolo. The English madrigals tended to be a bit lighter and even humorous at times, using bawdy or crude language and topics. Thomas Weeks's As Vesta Was from Latmos Hill Descending is a well-known example which includes several instances of word painting. Before the Renaissance period, many compositions in the Western world were meant to be sung, including many that were a cappella, meaning without accompaniment. However, many instruments were invented in the Renaissance, and eventually, instruments were given their own voice, so to speak. Some popular instruments included the lute, the recorder, the shawm, which is a wind instrument, and the tabor, which is a type of drum. In the beginning of the period, instruments were typically played to double the voice part, meaning they played the exact same notes as the singers. Later, the melody continued to be sung by the voice parts, and the instruments added accompaniment. Later still, instrumentalists used music written for multiple vocal parts and played the songs as instrumental arrangements. Eventually, composers got the idea and began writing music specifically for instruments. Much of the instrumental music was used for dancing, which became a genre unto itself. Finally, what's a little music without some movin' and shakin'? Even in the Renaissance, a good beat was hard to ignore. Complete with fancy clothing and fancy footwork, some dances like the pavane and the galliard were considered formal and were reserved for elite social gatherings. Other dances, like the brown and jig, were less formal and were purely for fun. The jig is still danced today and is famously performed by dance troupes worldwide in the form of Irish dance. In each case, instruments provided the music, and as such, new genres were created. In all, both sacred and secular musics evolved greatly during the Renaissance. The motets of Josquin des Prez and the masses of Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina made separate yet significant advancements in sacred music. The secular world expanded with the opportunity for new applications of singing, the development of new instruments, and the popularity of dance and dance music. In each case, the inclusion of the church composers, the elite, and the educated class allowed for significant advancements during the Renaissance.